Hello everyone, this is a video on smooth shading and graduating. Now this is something which is essential to be able to do when you're doing photorealistic drawing. You're trying to get a smooth effect, and it's something that my students struggle with a lot because it needs quite a lot of control in order to do it. But it is so important, and it's something that you need to practice a lot. So I've put together this short video which just gives you an indication of how to do the strokes. I'm using Faber-Castell 9000 pencils, and as you can see I'm holding the pencil quite close to the end so that I've got control over where the pencil is going. Now notice that when I'm making the stroke, every time I come up I come back down again, almost in an oval sort of movement. I'm not just going straight, because every time I come back down I'm going over a previous stroke that I've just made and therefore smoothing it out. That makes quite a difference to the finished effect, because the less time you take your pencil off the paper, the less opportunity you have to then go back in again with the pencil and then make marks, and then your pressure's altered. So you want to keep it moving, and you want to keep moving it about up and down as much as you can. Don't change direction, keep it methodical until you change direction here when you're doing cross-hatching. So cross-hatching is basically crossing over the previous hatching strokes that you've just made. So say you were doing an area of hatching in one direction, you would finish that area, stop, and then cross-hatch over the top, and that smooths out the previous strokes that you've just made. Okay? Now that was using an H with a fairly firm pressure. And H only has a certain amount of graphite in it, and the rest is clay. And the proportion of graphite and clay is what gives the pencils their different grading. So you can get all the way from 9H all the way through to 9B. And the higher the number next to the B, the higher the graphite content, the higher the next number next to the H, the higher the clay content. So that's why your H pencils feel very scratchy on the surface, and why the B's are very smooth. Now with an H pencil you're kind of in the middle, so there's a bit of range in it, but not as much as you get with some. But you can see if you control your pressure you can go quite lightly with it, and if your pressure's good and you do control it, you can actually get it to look quite smooth because of the clay, so you can get a lovely pale tone. Right, now how do you control it? This is one way you can do it. Steady your wrist and forearm, hold the pencil firmly but don't overgrip it, and relax. Now I know that's easy to say. Once you start doing this you're thinking about what you're doing, and obviously automatically you tense up, but then that makes you inadvertently put more pressure on the pencil. So notice my hand is actually secured on the surface of the paper, and so is my forearm. So I've got that element of control. If I don't have that, my pencil's moving about all over the place and I can't control where it's going. And notice that I use it quite close to the end, as I said earlier. Now this is a 3B, quite a short 3B, but I'm still holding it quite close to the end, and my hand is still quite firmly anchored, although obviously within saying that you've still got to be able to move it in the area that you're shading. Now a 3B has quite a lot more graphite in it, so you're going to be able to get quite a dark tone. So what I'm doing now is I am graduating. Now graduating you do all the time when you're doing photorealistic drawing, because everything is subject to light and shade. And therefore on any surface you are going to have the darkest deep shadows, and then as the light comes in that shadow is going to get lighter and lighter and lighter. And so you need to be able to show that by controlling your pressure on the pencil so that you get a graduated tone. And that means you press more firmly at the beginning of the stroke, and then you gradually take off your pressure as you move through the stroke whilst maintaining the smoothness of the stroke. Now this is something which a lot of people really struggle with, which is why I've put this video together to try and help you with it. Now, I'm trying to cover a reasonable kind of width here, going from dark to light. But notice I'm not really expecting to do it all in one hit. I'm kind of carefully moving my way across, and then I'm going back over the area I've just been, just to sort of make sure that I can control the tones as I'm going. It's really difficult to do it in one hit without having to go back and then kind of moderate it. At this point, when you're doing this exercise, it's very easy to get smaller and smaller and smaller at one end so that you haven't got that much depth. But if you do this exercise at home, you need to be making sure you do it sort of about an inch depth or so, because you need to have enough space. So look how close I'm holding the pencil to start with, and just look how many times I'm going over and over and over the area I've just been, and consider how many layers there are in that given small area. And the key word there is layers. Photorealistic drawing is all about layers. If you want to sketch, and they're absolutely fine if you want to sketch, but it's a different process. It isn't photorealistic drawing. You're ideally wanting your strokes to look totally smooth so that you can't see where you've put them. So throughout this area, I'm going back over where I've just been. I'm pressing a bit harder, then I'm pressing a bit lighter. I'm controlling my pressure continually so that I get a nice even graduation. You'll notice on there you can see actually some texture on the paper. That's also because it's a 3B and because you have more graphite content in that pencil. And so any tooth that there is in the paper will be picked up by it. When you're using something like an H or higher than that, like a 3H, you get less texture because there is less graphite to clay content. Most people are used to using the Bs because they're so soft and smooth and they flow over the surface of the paper nicely. But I would say experiment with the H pencils because they do give you, once you get used to them, they do allow you to build in a lot more tone in your drawings. And the more tones you get in your drawings, the more realistic they're going to look. So I'm still working away on this bit, trying to get the depth that I need. So there you go. That's graduating. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing with an H. Now the H pencil is a lot harder because there's more clay content. So there's a little bit more work involved when you're using an H pencil, or indeed any of the H's, because you've got to control it much more, and that's why people find using H pencils a bit strange to start with because they're not used to using them. Okay, now also you've got to get used to feeling the pencil on the paper and judging how much depth to go in first, because obviously if you're going from dark to light, you need your dark to be the darkest you can be with that pencil so that you can graduate out light from it. So if you're not starting from the right depth, you're not going to get such a graduation. That said, you need to know your pencils so that you know how much pressure you can put on the paper with that particular pencil so as not to bring up the surface of the paper. Be really careful with any of the H grades because there's so much clay in them and because they are so sharp. If you overpress with these pencils, what will happen is you make an impression in the paper and then sometimes the paper will rough up. Now, I'm using 220 GSM Winsor & Newton cartridge paper, smooth surface, which is the one I recommend to my students. 220 GSM just means grams per square meter, which is the weight of the paper. And this is quite heavyweight. I would always recommend you get a heavyweight paper when you're doing photorealistic drawing. If it's very, very light, it's the sort of paper that you would use if you were sketching or if you were doing life drawing or still life, something like that, which is very thin, it's probably about 150 GSM, 130 GSM. And if you're putting lots of layers on it with these pencils in the way that I'm doing now, you'll go through the paper. So I would always say use Winsor & Newton or something that's got a lot of depth to it. And make sure you get smooth surface as well. So I'm now going back over, as I did before with the 3B, although this is harder because it isn't so smooth over the surface, so you've got to work a bit harder to actually control it. And also, because it's an H, there isn't going to be such a range of tones from the dark to the light because you don't have as much graphite content. So if you were doing something that was a very subtle, say you were doing a flower petal or something that was quite light, it was sort of a peachy colour, this is what you would be doing. If you were doing somebody's face and you were shading the skin tone and you were trying to get the shadow around the nose or around the chin, this is what you would be doing. Notice every so often I'm rubbing off the end of the pencil on a sheet next to it where I'm actually shading. That's because every time I take my pencil off, you run the risk that you're going to move it and then you're going to not be using the same bit that you used before. So you want to make sure that you're not suddenly introducing the jagged edge to your shading. So I basically rub off the side of the pencil onto the paper so that it feels smooth and it's got a nice purchase on the paper, and then I go back in and do my shading. That is so important. One of the best things I see when I'm looking at my students' work is when I see a sheet of A4 paper and it's got lots and lots of pencil lines and scribbles and things all over it, because I know then that they're doing the right thing and trying to get their pencils in the right kind of state before they do their shading. It does make such a difference. All these things, like everything, after a while of doing this, it becomes automatic and you don't think about it, but it does take a little while before you get to that stage, until you feel that you can do it smoothly and evenly and it starts to look photorealistic. So don't be too hard on yourself if when you start doing this exercise you think, oh gosh, this is really, really complicated. I thought this was going to be easier than it is. It's deceptive. But I hope you can see from here, just by adding those layers over the top, how gradually it's looking smoother and smoother and smoother. On to other tools that you can use. This is a tortillon, which you can get online. Now, this is quite useful for smoothing out strokes somewhere if you have got lines in something you're working on, and it's quite good for detail. The only thing is, it doesn't replace your hatching skills. It's a tool for helping you, but it can make your hatching look sort of fluffy and a bit messy if you're not careful, so do bear that in mind. This is a stump, also you can get online. Cardboard. You use this on the side though, don't use it on the point because it will just fluff up. So use it on the side if you were shading a big area and you wanted to cover a big, say you were doing a big background, use it on the side, and that's quite useful. This is a pointed tip eraser, Tomo Mono Zero eraser, fine. which is really, really good for fine detail, for taking out small areas, and it's also good for hair, which we're going to do in a second. So just doing some hair strokes. So basically you put in your hair strokes. I'm just using an HB there, sharp HB for doing fur and hair. Then you use your pointed tip eraser that I've cut straight through, so I've got a nice fine clean edge, and then you use it in the same way that you use the pencil and take out areas. Really, really good for highlights. So that's the pointed tip eraser. And the putty eraser, kneadable putty eraser, try and see if you can get the Maped version. Not all putty erasers are alike. Avoid the white ones because they will take up graphite and deposit it on your work. Get the grey Maped eraser. Right, and then you can knead it into the shape that you want, and then it just takes out a very, very fine layer. So if you've put too much shading down and the tone's too dark, you can just take off a little layer, and because it's so soft it won't do anything to the surface of the paper, so you can go again. And this is a drawing of me, a self-portrait I did a few years ago, and you can see the graduated shading that I've done on the cheeks, down around the side of the face, on the chin, on the neck, around the side of the nose, and there are loads and loads of layers. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Take care. Bye.